Erik, please welcome.
Thank you very much. And I've seen that there's quite a number of people already joining. So I'm happy that I'm not doing this for nobody. We are here to talk about SQLcl. I'm trying to get you as excited about it as I am. I think it's a really good tool. And if you're not aware of what it can do for you, then I hope after this talk, you will at least go and try if it is as good for you as it is for me. Okay, then who am I? Well, obviously I'm Erik, and on the bottom right, you can see a couple of ways to contact me if you wish. I'm an Oracle ace, and I didn't always work with Oracle technology. I used to work in laboratories, but since 1995, I'm working with Oracle stuff and working for myself since 2009. I play with Apex, but most of my work takes place in the database. I'm definitely not an Apex developer. Most of a lot of things that I do in projects is data migrations. That seems to always keep coming back in my career. If you want to know more about the ACE program, if you would like to be in the ACE program or want to nominate somebody, this slide gives you all the information with links to places where you can find that information. So I wish you good luck with that because it's quite good to be in there. What is SQLcl? Well, basically it's just SqLPlus, but with a lot more functionality. It's built in Java by the same people that built SQL Developer. In fact, it's also part of SQL Developer. And it runs everywhere because it's written in Java, where you have a Java runtime engine. A question that is often asked is, will it replace SqLPlus? And the answer that's always given is no, SqLPlus will always be there. And I used to doubt that because I think, why would Oracle spend time, energy, money into developing two tools that basically have the same purpose? But then I heard from somebody knowledgeable on the fact is that the database itself heavily relies on SqLPlus being there. Apparently, if SqLPlus were to vanish, then that would require hundreds of thousands of changes to the database itself. And yeah, I don't think Oracle will ever do that. So yeah, I think it's right. SqLPlus will always be there. Don't worry about it vanishing. It will be there, but you have an extra tool with more functionality. How do you get it? Well, first of all, if you have SQL Developer, then you already have it because it's in there in the bin directory. There's a SQL file, that one you can run on Linux, and a SQL.exe that you can run on Windows. Because it is in SQL Developer, it nowadays is also in every DBMS installation that you have. But that will be on the server side, and yeah, well, as a developer, you don't usually have access to the server, so that's of no use to you. There's also a standalone version available on Oracle Software Downloads, and the only place where you can't find it at this moment is the Oracle client software. And I can imagine why that is, because you don't need the client software to run SQLcl, but it is client software, so I think it really should be included in there. How do we install this? Well, this might be a bit complicated, so don't worry if you can't follow me, but I'll try to explain it to you. First of all, you go to the SQL Developer download page. I told you it's going to be complicated. You're looking for SQLcl, and you have to go to the SQL Developer download page. Oh, well, what can I say? Anyway, you go there, then you log in. You go to the download link, which is all the way down on the page. You click it, you accept the license, You save the file somewhere, you unzip the file, and you run SQLcl, and the job is done. I told you it's very complicated, so if you can't follow this, then don't worry, just ask an expert to help you, no problem. Because it's just an unzip of a zip file, you can have as many versions next to each other as you wish. This is what my machine currently looks like. I have a folder that has the current version that I use for everyday work, and I have a folder that has all sorts of versions of SQLcl. I can imagine not everybody does this, but at least you can have the current version and install the new version next to it. Try it until you are satisfied that it still works as you please, as you wish, and then just switch to the next one. There is no need for a client installation. That one is true, very true, but there is one specific case where you need a client installation after all, and we will get to that when we get to the tips in the end. But normally you don't need any Oracle client installation. There's no need for a TNS names. Well, you can use one, but you don't need it. And there's no need for a JDK. All you need is a Java runtime environment of version 1.8 or later. The release notes, they still say that Java versions 9 and 10 are not yet supported. However, a year and a half ago on Jeff Smith's blog, he already said that you can already use Java 11 for SQLcl. Now note that the fact that he says that you can use it probably means that you're okay when you're using it. But the fact that they say it's not supported means that if you do run into trouble, well, you're basically on your own. Okay, let's get this out of the way first. Are there any downsides to SQLcl? Because every tool not only has positive things, also downsides usually. Well, SQLcl doesn't. Well, just kidding, of course. The first one, there are bugs. It's the one I hear most frequently. People say, I'm not using SQLcl because it's got bugs. And I have to admit, it's true. This is an example. It's definitely not the only one, but it's an example. Since 18.2, when you use server output with format wrapped, then if your script has comments, then the output has extra empty lines. For example, this script, 4 commands and 1 prompt. Then in SqLPlus, it looks like, the output looks like this. And that's exactly what you would expect. In SQLcl, it looked like this. And that's not very nice. At every version since 18.2, as soon as there was a new version, I checked if this was solved. And I did that when 22 came out as well, hoping that it would finally be solved. And what did I see? Yeah, it got worse. That's a shame. I've recently learned that this is not because the bug itself got worse, but there's another bug that causes empty lines as well. So you get empty lines on top of empty lines, and that's why this is worse. But I have it on good authority that this might be fixed in the next version. So I'm hoping for the best. In fact, this is the reason why I did not go to 22. I'm skipping that version. I'm still at 19.4. And I'm waiting for the next version to come out. However, SQLcl is frequently updated. As I said, I know almost for sure that this bug will be gone in the next version, and that version is coming pretty soon, I hope. SQLcl is updated frequently, so bugs get fixed. And it's not like SqLPlus does not have bugs. Even in SqLPlus, you run into bugs every now and then. So I don't really think this is a reason to not use SQLcl, unless, of course, a certain bug really stops you from doing your work. Another disadvantage, it's slower to start than SqLPlus. Once it's started, no problem. But because it's a Java program, it takes some more time to start. Is it a problem? Well, no, I don't think so. On my laptop, it takes less than a second. It's almost instantaneous to start SqLPlus, and SqLcl takes a couple of seconds. It's not that problematic, I think. But yeah, if you run SqLcl for the first time and you're used to SqLPlus, then you get the feeling, oh man, this takes forever. But yeah, if you get used to it, it's not that much of a problem, I think. This video shows you what happened with a client a couple of years ago where I had a really, really slow computer. SqLPlus, still on that computer, almost instantaneous. But then I went to SqLcl. There we go. And well, yeah, I said, let's do the Q&A at the end, but maybe this would be a better time to do it because we can do the Q&A. We can have a beer afterwards. We can go to dinner. We can have a party, have a good time. And yeah, we can go back to work. So this is really slow. This is really annoying, but this was on a really, really, really slow computer. This is not what you will normally see. Another disadvantage. Well, it does not support everything that SqLPlus does. If you look at the release notes, then this is what is not supported. Rep header, rep footer, and a couple of variables like SQL terminator. Most of these things, in my entire career, I've never used them at all. So personally, I'm not bothered by this. Well, if you have 1,000 of scripts that you use every day and you have a heavily use of this stuff, then yeah, this is a problem for you. But I think for most people, this will not be a problem. Apart from this list, there's also the fact that the column command does not accept the entire SqLPlus syntax. The new value is not ignored, but everything else is ignored. Sorry, I said it does not accept the entire SqLPlus syntax. It does accept it. What I meant to say is it does accept the entire syntax, but the new value is the only thing that is not ignored. All the other things, you don't run into an error when you use it, but it is just ignored. Example, here I do a column statement with new value and no print. So the result of the query should go into into a variable, and the result of the query should not be put on screen. And in SqLPlus, that's exactly what you see. But in SqLcl, the value does get into the variable, but you also see the result of the query. The no print is ignored. Of course, you can just put a term out of around this, but then if something goes wrong, you don't see that either. I really think they should implement the no print option for column, but so far, unfortunately, it's not there. So what makes SqLcl the cool kid? And by the way, if you know what series this comes from, then you're probably as old as I am. If you look at the two tools next to each other when starting up, then apart from an extra empty line here or there, there's not much of a difference to notice. But when you start using it, then you will see the differences. First of all, let's have a look at the help. If you type in help, then this is what you will see. All sorts of commands that it supports, and a couple of them are highlighted. The highlighted ones are the ones that SqLPlus just don't have. These are unique for SqLcl. By the way, if you use classic on, it's some setting that we will run into later as well, then it doesn't look like this. Then you will have just one long list of commands, and commands are not highlighted, but instead of highlighting, there's an asterisk next to the command. So it looks a little bit different. But this is what it is by default. So you see that there are quite a few commands that are unique to SQLcl. And the help is really good. You should really make use of it because it's pretty good, but it's definitely not perfect. For example, for the bridge command, it has modifiers, but they are not mentioned in the help. We will come to the bridge command later. And as you can see, there's a setErrorL. It's over here. But the setErrorL is not a command, not in SqLPlus and not in SQLcl. If you type in help setErrorL, you will go to the help for setError logging. And it used to be that if you typed help set, then in the list of stuff that you could set, error logging was missing. But at least in 20.2, that one is added, so that's fixed. In SQLcl, we have command completion, which is a pretty awesome feature. If you start typing a statement, like for instance, this select star from EVR, and then you hit tab, you see a list of all tables that match what you already typed. And because in this case, all matches don't only start with EVR, but with avrox underscore, it already filled out avrox underscore and it starts waiting for extra input. Now, if I would type in another S and hit tab again, then the list is shortened to only have the ones that start with avrox S. And because all of them start with avrox underscore snapshot, it would fill in snapshot as well. The query needs to be sensible. If you have errors in your queries, stupid things like select nothing from EVR, and you hit tab, then nothing will happen. It won't work. It works for a lot of things: tables, views, keywords, column names. But even if you type an add and you hit tab, then you get a list of all the files and directories in your current working directory, which is pretty awesome, I think. Here you can see it in action. Select star from EVR. And I hit tab. And there's the list. avrox is already filled in. Type in SN, hit tab. The list is shortened, a snapshot is filled in. I type P and tab. There's only one hit left, so it's filled in and the list is gone. That's pretty neat, I think. We also have history in SQLcl. You can just browse through the history of your statements using your arrow up and arrow down. And you have complete statements in your history, not just lines. When you use SqLPlus in Windows, you have a history, but if you browse through your history, you go through the individual lines of the statements that you entered. In SQLcl, it's the entire statement. You browse through the statements. You can also type in history, and then you get a list of all the executed statements with one statement per line. If you do history full, you get the same thing, but not one statement per line, but you get the statements as you have typed them, multi-line. You can type in history usage, then you get the same as history, but the number of times the statement was executed is added to that list. And with history time, the number of times executed is replaced by the execution time of the last time you executed that statement. History clear just erases the buffer. History with a number loads the statement at that number in your buffer. And show history shows you the settings of your history. History is enabled by default, and so far I have not found a way to disable it, but I don't have a reason to disable it anyway, so I don't really care about that, but I haven't found a way to disable it. Duplicate statements are not stored. Every unique statement is just stored once in your history, and that's it. Multi-line commands are in there as one entry, as we have seen. You do not get your individual lines, but the entire statement. By default, 100 statements will be stored in your history, but you can increase it with set history limit. Failed queries by default are not stored in your history, and that can be an advantage if you like it, because you don't get silly queries in your history. On the other hand, if you type a 30-line query and you run it and it appears that there's a typo in the first line, making it crash, then you can't just go back to that statement, correct the problem, and run it again by default. So I like to do set history fails. There you can give a maximum number of failed statements that will be stored in history. So if you have a typo in your query, then you can go back to that one, correct it, and run it again. By default, it does not store show history connect and set commands. Well, connect, I think, is a very wise thing to not store in your history, because it will have, it may have password information in there. So I think that's a good thing. Other things you maybe you do want them in there. Maybe there are other commands that you don't want in your history too. So you can change this with set history blacklist. Remember that when you do a set history blacklist, it overrides the current blacklist. So if you want to keep what's in there and add some things, then you will have to take the stuff that's in your blacklist right now in the new command as well. And history is saved at the end of your SQLcl session, but only if you exit using exit or quit. If you just close the window, then SQLcl did not have the chance to save the stuff for you, so it will be gone. There is an undocumented option, history save, then you can explicitly save what is currently in your history. But well, if you remember to type history save, then you will probably remember to use quit or exit at the end of your session as well. So I don't think that really adds too much. This is one to keep in mind. Exec statements are expanded to PL SQL blocks, not just in history always. It's because that gives SQLcl the chance to have your parameters as bind variables. So that's a safety measure for your history. But in versions before 20.2, if you ended your exec statement with a semicolon, then you get an invalid statement in your history because of an extra semicolon. This is fixed in 20.2, so you should be safe from then onwards. But if you're using an older version, then you can run into this. You see this here. We have an exec dummy proc, with a semicolon at the end. You shouldn't really do this because, well, you shouldn't do it. SqLPlus and SqLcl accepts it, but because of this transformation that happens in SqLcl to a PL SQL block, you see that in the history, you get a begin, dummy proc, end, semicolon, semicolon. Now, if we run this statement as it is in the history, obviously you get an error. If you then execute dummy proc without the semicolon, then you would expect this is a new query. It's not identical to what is already in the history. So probably we have this one, the correct one in history as well. Then unfortunately, SqLcl still thinks it's identical to the one you did before. So it does not replace the incorrect query, and the incorrect query is still in there. But as I said, in 20.2, that's corrected. You shouldn't be running into this anymore. We have command line editing with SqLcl. What does that mean? Well, you can edit a complete statement without an external editor. If you just go to the statement you want to edit in your history using up and down keys, then you hit the left key to start editing mode. Then you can go anywhere inside your query. You can modify it however you want, and you can press Ctrl-R to run the modified statement. Here you can see it in action. I have a query on user objects, returns 17. I just go up, I go left, then I can go anywhere in the statement. I go to user, delete what's there, replace it with DBA, hit Ctrl-R, and I find 104 objects in DBA objects. So this is quite an easy way to just correct queries. We have code formatting, just like in SQL Developer. You can format your code. In fact, it uses the SQL Developer formatter. What we see here is a query. Everything is on just one line, and it runs correctly, but it's hardly readable. So if we do format buffer, then suddenly we have a query that is more readable. Well, these are the default formatting settings, so it might not be to your liking, but this is what it is out of the box. You can change the formatter rules, but you have to do that in SQL Developer. You can use format rules file name to load any formatter rules file to use that one as a formatting rule. Format buffer is what we saw here, and then you format the buffer of the SqLcl. But you can also do format file, and then you can format a file on your file system and write the output to a different file. The formatting of query output. SqLcl has a lot of options for that. We have SqlFormat. It formats the output, and you use it set SqlFormat, and you give it a format. You can also use that format in a query itself with a hint like this one, /*CSV*/. And these are the formats that SqLcl supports. And that's quite a lot. I'm not going to go into all of them, but as you can see, you can do CSV. Delimited is like CSV, but you have more control over the separators and delimiters. The XML, JSON, and JSON formatted. JSON is just JSON on one line. JSON formatted, you get end of lines, and you get what do you call it? A spacing at the front of every line. HTML, fixed, loader, insert statements, and Ansiconsole. And with default, you get back to your standard formatting. Delimited, as example, it returns character separated values, and you can just give it a delimiter character, and you can give it an enclosure left and an enclosure right character. The delimiter cannot be a non-printable character, obviously. Well, obviously, it can't be a tab, for example. And enclosures cannot be empty, so you must use enclosures. This, as an example, set SqlFormat delimited asterisk, and then the brackets as enclosures. And then when I run this query, the output looks like this. As you can see, the aliases of the columns are in the first line. The enclosures are used. The enclosures are used, and there is an asterisk as a delimiter. And this is the data line. Ansiconsole is, well, pretty powerful. It outputs your, it formats your output more readable. Column widths usually have the width of the data type. With Ansiconsole, the width of a column is based on the actual data and the column name of the column. For example, here we have the standard formatting, a select from user objects. Object name is a really wide column, so it gets pushed to a new line. In SQLcl, it looks like this. It's a lot more readable. Some things could be enhanced, in my humble opinion. If you have data that has an end of line, then it's not really handled correctly. Like this, you see that the second row has an end of line in the second column, and the new line doesn't start at the start of the column, but at the start of the line, and that's not really very nice. And if you have a statement and you edit it and run it with enter, a statement in your history, and you run it with enter, then the header starts at the last line of your statement, and it looks like this, and that's ugly. That was true until version 19.4. 20.2, it seems to be fixed. I haven't seen it happen there yet. Number format. You can also have a default number format. If you do Ansiconsole and you give it a format in the formatting of Java, then every number column that you select will have this format. This is what you normally get if you select a number column, and this is what you can have if you use this format. But remember, this will, as of that moment, happen to every number column that you select. So even if you have an ID or whatever, this will be the format that is used. An ID, currency, whatever. You can highlight data returned by queries. I don't think this will be used a lot, but it's a nice thing to do. You can define rules in a JSON file. In this case, I've named it highlighted.json. And then you can have rules like this. You define a test type. The ones you can do is start with, end with, contains, exact, and regular expression. You define a test, and you define which colors should be used if there is a match. After you've created this JSON file, you can do set SqlFormat Ansiconsole -config highlight.json, and then you can run a query, and it looks like this. All sorts of colors in there. So instantly you see where the interesting parts of your data are. It does not work in your standard Windows DOS box. It might work in the new Windows terminal. I haven't tried that yet, but I think it will work there, but I don't know. It does work in alternatives like conemu, which I use. And note that all the tests, they only highlight the part that matches the test, except for regular expression. You can see over here that this one is a match for the regular expression I had, because the regular expression said if there is a number in the name, and it has numbers, but then the entire string is highlighted. And note that the first rule that is a match is applied. If we look at, where is it? This one, and we see that it matches the first rule because it starts with 0, and it matches the last rule because it has a number in it. but only the highlighting of the first rule is applied. There is a new feature in 19.4, and it looks like this. It's pretty neat. Even though you use Ansiconsole, then your output still could be wider than your window. So if we do select star from employees, then it looks pretty much like rubbish. It's not very readable. But since 19.4, we can just resize the window and plop, is readable again. Now that's quite nice, I think. Apex export. Yes, we can export Apex from SqLcl. You can list all applications, all Apex applications with either the command Apex or Apex list. And then this is what you get. A list of all the application IDs with their names, in which workspace they belong, etc. Once you have the information that you need from this, you can do an export. According to the help in the old days, it was just export app ID, and that exports the application, which could be combined with spool for writing to a file. In 19.4, this help was, well, rather useless. All it said was null. And now in 22, the help is back, and it says export Apex applications and or workspaces. There's more to it. You can do more. Apart from just doing an Apex export with an app ID, if before 19.2, now 19.2 and before, you typed in Apex export and then some rubbish stuff in there, and suddenly you got extra help. There's a lot of options that you have for exporting different parts of your Apex application. In 19.4, if you do this same rubbish, then you get a Java error. And in 22, it says unable to process request. So they seem to not want you to see this, but the options that you see here still work. So I suggest that you save this slide somewhere and just remember that this all works, although the help doesn't talk about it. Information in SqLcl, the information command to be precise. There's a short version of it. It's called info, and it shows information about object types. It's kind of like the desc, the describe command in SqLPlus, which is also available in SqLcl, but it gives you a lot more information. This is what you get. Table analysis information, column commands, default values, indexes, foreign keys referencing the table. Note that it is obviously slower. A simple desk has a lot less information to get from the repository, so it takes more time to get the information for info than for desk. So if you really just want to, if you really just want to have a list of columns, then you probably just want to use desk. This is what it looks like. I see that the time is going really fast, so I'm going to step up a bit, I think. This is what it looks like. A lot of information in there that could be very useful. Because this still isn't enough, obviously, there's also Info Plus. When you use this, then the column commands are replaced by some other stuff information. Low, high value, number of distinct values, and type of histogram. And then it looks like this. We have aliases in the SqLcl. You can assign a user-defined name to anything you can do with SqLcl. These are the things that you can do with it. I'm just going to leave this here. You can browse through it later when you have the slides. Remember that unless you use save, Alias is for just this SqLcl session. If you exit your SqLcl, then any alias you have defined is lost, unless, of course, you do save. Here I have an alias for Anatab, which is a PL/SQL block. And in this PL/SQL block, I have two bind variables for table owner and table to analyze. After declaring this, I can just say Anatab, a user and a table gets analyzed. So you have parameters with aliases as well. Aliases are case sensitive. If you define it with lowercase and you execute it with uppercase, it won't find the alias. You can even have host commands as an alias. This one is alias dir list, and it does a dir command on your on Windows. The location of SqLcl is important with aliases. If you have a space in your path towards SqLcl, then you run into this severe Java error. It looks like this. And suddenly you have an enormous list of aliases that you never declared. It's probably some internal stuff that they use. The error only shows up the first time you do this. Every next time, everything works just fine, but the list is still here. Some little things. Working directory. We have pwd, print working directory. You can get the working directory pretty easy in this way. That's nice. But even nicer, you can do a cd to change your working directory. In SqLPlus, you would have to exit SqLPlus, change your working directory, and start SqLPlus again. SqLcl, you can do that from within SqLcl. And this is what it looks like. You can find file names. Just do a find file name, and it will list all the files in your SqLPATH in the working directory that match your file name. You can do a which file name. It will give you the file that will be executed if you would use that file name with an @ You can spool to a zip file. If you spool to a file name and you use a zip as extension, and SqLcl will spool to a file and zip it automatically. If you spool to mytestzip, then your data file will be called mytestout, and it will be in the zip file mytestzip. Now, if you want a different extension for your data file, then you can do it like this. In this case, it will be written to mytestjson, and it will be in a zip file mytestjson-zip. However, if you do mytestzip.json.zip, both zips and the character before will be stripped from this name, so you are left with mytest.json, and the zip file is named correctly. We have error. If we run into an Oracle error, then we can Google it, or we can just say error Ora 24381, and you get the information about this error. It only works for Ora and TNS messages. SqLcl has Codescan. This is a piece of code that has a SQL injection vulnerability. In SQL 22, we can set Codescan, and if we do that, then it will warn us about the fact that this code has a SQL injection vulnerability. It will not prevent you from creating this procedure, it will just warn you. Data definition language. We have the DDL commands. It's basically shorthand for dbms metadata get DDL. And the behavior, because it is just dbms metadata get DDL, can be altered by using the other procedures of DBMS metadata. If you use this often, make an alias for this. So you can do things like this. Run DDL no secadd to turn off segment attributes for DDL. Then run DDL eronum, and there is the statement of your table. The bridge command. Bridge gets data from a remote connection without first declaring a database link. This is what a statement looks like. You have to use a JDBC URL that looks like this. This is an example of a JDBC URL. And by default, your target table will be created. So if it already exists, you will run into an error. These are the modifiers I talked about before. You can use these to change this behavior. Replace replaces the table if it already exists. Appends the data to it. Truncates the table before it adds the data. And skip is the same as the first one, only if the table does exist. You don't get an error, but the bridge command is ignored. This is an example of that. Have a look at that later when you have the time for that. You have to remember that the modifier has to be directly after the closing bracket of the query, as you can see here. If you have a space in between, it won't work. The repeat statement. It repeats the statement in the buffer for as many times as you want with a wait time between executions. This is how you do it. Repeat the number of times and the seconds between executions. You can wait for 2 minutes maximum, and this is it in action. I have a query that gets the action column from the $v session. Then I repeat this once every 10th second for 1,000 times. If this is a heavy query, then your DBA won't be happy with you. But here you can see that it just updates what's on your screen for 1,000 times. So you can monitor things like your logging tables or whatever. Liquibase. Well, I'm not going to go into that. I just want to mention it. There's Liquibase support. I know nothing about Liquibase, so I'm not going to try to pretend that I know everything about it. If you work with Liquibase, then this might be something you want to look into. But I can't tell you anything sensible about it, so I'm just going to leave it here for you. It supports Liquibase. But what if you want more? If all this stuff isn't enough for you? Well, you can do scripting. You can build your own functionality in JavaScript and make use of the Java libraries. You can run it this way, script myscript.js, or you can even make it a custom command. So if anything is missing for you, basically you can just build it yourself. This is an example. I have built a file to bind script. It reads a local file and puts the contents into a SqlPlus bind variable. Then you can use it like this. For example, I'm saying file to bind. I give it a file name and I give it a bind variable name. And then when I print the bind variable, there it is. So now I can use the contents of this file in any SQL or PL SQL that I want. And this is something that just isn't in SqLcl by default. It just isn't in there. You have to build this yourself. And you can. It's beyond the scope of this presentation to show you how. I have a couple of blog posts. In fact, these are for now my only blog posts. But if you are interested in this, you can have a look at these to see how this is done. And there's a lot of example scripts online too. Then, at last, the tips. I've got a couple of tips now, and then I'm done. SqLcl login. It uses the same SQLPATH as SqLPlus, so it will look at the same login.sql as SqLPATH. So what, I hear you say? Well, if there's stuff that is specific to one tool in that login, then the other tool, when starting up, will show you errors. And I don't know about you, but I hate that. I don't want errors that I should ignore. But it's easily fixed. If you, like I do, set everything that is common in one script that is not called login.sql, in my case, common_login.sql, and put it in some directory. Then I have two subdirectories, one for SqLPlus and one for SqLPlus, one for SqLcl. And they both have their own login.sql. It does all tool-specific stuff, and it calls the common login.sql one level higher in the directory tree. Then I create batch files, an SP for SqLPlus and an SC for SqLcl. I add the login directory for that tool to the SQL path, and I run the executable passing all the parameters. And then all is well. This is what it then looks like. Common login.sql script, all the common stuff. Then the SqLPlus login.sql, and there's the SqLcl login.sql. And then we have the two batch files to start the tools. Have a look at that when you have the time. Environment variables. If you want to run a script and you want to use an environment variable like this, it has to be in uppercase. Here you see that I set an environment variable script location in lowercase with a path in there. Then when I run a script and I use this environment variable as a location, it will run into an error because it can't find this environment variable. If you set the same environment variable with uppercase name, then if you run it, it succeeds. It's something to be aware of. Language. By default, well, not by default, SqLcl will give you the messages based on the language of your operating system. In my case, that would be Dutch, and I sure don't want that. If you want to change it, you need to set this one, Java tool options. You can do that system-wide, of course, but then it will be true for every Java application that you run. If you just place this in a batch file, again, the batch file that you use to run your SqLcl, then it is true for SqLcl and not for all the other tools you use. By default, your error messages show a lot more than they do in SqLPlus. It looks like this, the top box. If you don't like this, then you can use set classic on, and then it looks like the bottom box, and it's more like SqLPlus. Versions before 22, if you set feedback off, then it also suppresses all error messages. So whatever happens, whatever goes wrong, you won't see it. 22, it's fixed. Thank God, finally. The release notes of 18.3 said that it was solved, but it is still present until 19.4. And then the last tip, if you have a TNS names that has multiple aliases for an entry, like this one, where you have Oracle, oracle.world. It's quite a common thing in TNS names, .ora. Then it will lead on errors when connecting. The solution for this is to have an environment variable Oracle Home that points to your Oracle client software. And this is what I said at the start. This is the one thing where you do need your Oracle client software to fix this. The other way to fix it, of course, is to split these entries in your TNS names.ora in two separate entries. But usually you don't control these TNS names. So this is the other solution. The screenshot here, have a look at it afterwards. Then you can see that setting this environment variable fixes it. Okay, that was the last tip. Then I think I ran over time, but I'm ready for questions.
Hello, my friend.
Hi there.
It's Rodrigo.
Hi, Rodrigo.
There is a question.
Sorry for rushing it, by the way, but yeah, I already said I had a lot to talk about. So
yes, there is a question and answer. Are you able to hear that? Not to hear, to read that. If you have some.
I'm going to have a look. Just a second.
Why can't SqLcl behave the same way as SqLPlus pressing Ctrl+C to seek int? If networking isn't properly configured, like listener, TNS, etc., SQL just ranks forever. SqLPlus doesn't. Any fix or advice to handle this?
Sorry, I've lost you halfway through. I'm trying to find the question and answer so I can read it myself. Here it is. Why can't SqLcl behave the same way as SqLPlus, pressing Ctrl+C? If networking isn't properly configured, listener, TNS, etc., SqLcl just hangs forever. SqLPlus does not. Oh, the question suddenly is gone. And
okay, no, sorry, it's me because I typed answered. Yeah, sorry.
I see it, yes. SqLPlus does not. Any fix or advice how to handle this? As a DBA, I need to test and therefore terminate quickly. I see. Well, in my personal, I have not seen this behavior that you mentioned with that networking not properly configured, because my network is properly configured. No, just kidding. But I have not seen that, so I don't know how it behaves in that situation. Ctrl+C, in my experience, behaves pretty much as I expected. It just kills the session. It just ends SqLcl as far as I know. If it doesn't, then I think you really should just go to MOS and just file a ticket to get that fixed, because I'm sorry, I can't give you a good answer on this one, because I have not seen this behavior, so I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, so Eric, there is no more questions here on the chat.
So are there any people
thank you again. No, there is some people still here, but they are probably moving to the next session, which we start about now. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for people in this session.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.